been broken more than once, not because they failed to learn, but because the lesson required going deeper than the first breaking could reach. They stand in the wreckage again, watching others build once and remain stable, while their own life keeps collapsing in silence. The question they carry alone, never spoken. What is wrong with me that this keeps happening? It was never punishment. The repetition was not God's frustration with their slowness. God does not keep breaking the men he has given up on. He keeps breaking the men he cannot afford to leave incomplete. Each collapse was not starting over. It was precision removing another floor the first breaking could not reach. The divine design behind repeated suffering is rarely gentle, but it is never careless. Why was my life so hard when others had it so easy? How many times does a man have to be broken before God is finished? Until the foundation is built on something that cannot be taken. He rebuilt his life after the first collapse. 3 years earlier it had taken everything. His marriage, the career he had spent a decade climbing, the version of himself he once trusted. He moved to a new city, built a new routine, forged a quieter, more careful man who woke at the same hour every morning and refused to speak the old names. The apartment was small but paid for. The job was steady. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe the ground had finally stopped moving. Then the second collapse arrived. It came faster this time, cleaner, almost surgical. Different faces, different reasons, same result. Everything he had rebuilt simply came apart in his hands. Most men notice the pattern. They see the same kind of breaking repeat across different chapters. Relationship, identity, work, belief, and they call it failure. They tell themselves they must have missed the lesson the first time. They look at men whose lives stayed upright after one storm and feel the quiet accusation. I keep failing at the same thing. The shame settles in the chest like something permanent. They begin to distrust their own hands. Every stable thing they build starts to feel temporary, because history has taught them it will be. They lie awake cataloging decisions, replaying conversations, measuring their own resilience against hochstatistical, an invisible standard they can never quite reach. The collapses stop feeling like events. They start feeling like evidence. He carried that evidence for a long time. The weight sat in him during commutes, during quiet evenings, during the seconds before sleep when the mind has no defenses left. He had done the work. He had surrendered, humbled himself, tried to become whatever he thought God wanted. Yet here he was again, standing in fresh wreckage, asking the same question in a different room. The repetition felt personal. It felt like proof that something in him was fundamentally unfixable. But the breaking was never repeated because he failed to learn. It was repeated because the lesson had layers the first collapse could not reach. The first breaking removed what was obviously unstable. The second removed what was merely strong. Strength is not the same as foundation. A man can be strong, disciplined, even faithful, and still be standing on ground that will not hold when the real assignment arrives. God does not select his soldiers for the hardest assignments based on how unbreakable they already are. He selects them based on their capacity to be broken without becoming brittle again and again, until only what cannot be taken remains. The divine purpose behind repeated suffering is rarely visible in the moment. It is surgical. It is precise. It is the curriculum of a man being prepared for weight most men will never be asked to carry. The men God breaks more than once are not the ones who failed to learn the lesson. They are the ones whose assignment required a foundation deeper than one breaking could reach. He stopped interpreting the collapses as evidence of deficiency that night. Not with fanfare. Just a quiet recognition that arrived while he sat in the same chair he had rebuilt everything around. The pattern was not punishment. It was selection. Each breaking had taken something specific, not because it was weak, but because it would have collapsed later. Underweight, the assignment would one day demand. God does not waste repeated breaking on men. He does not trust with uncommon assignments. The repetition was never frustration. It was engineering. And for the first time, the wreckage no longer felt like the end of the story. It felt like the only way the story could have begun. There was a moment during the second collapse when he realized he was not panicking. Not numb, not indifferent. Just calm in a way that unsettled him more than the loss itself. Other men called to check how he was holding it together. He had no honest answer. He was not holding anything together. He had simply been here before. Same hollow feeling in the chest, Same sudden absence of everything he once counted on, and something in him had already learned the motion of continuing anyway. Most men notice this shift in the ones who have been broken repeatedly. They see a strange steadiness in the middle of wreckage. A man who should be screaming simply keeps moving. He answers emails the same week his world ends. He shows up for obligations while everything inside feels stripped bare. They watch it and assume something essential has died in him. He assumed the same thing. For years he carried the quiet fear that the repeated breaking had damaged him permanently. That the calm was not strength but scar tissue. That he had lost the ability to feel real hope, to trust stability, to believe anything could last. He envied the men who still panicked when things fell apart, because at least they still believed in permanence, enough to be shocked by its absence. He no longer could. The capacity to function after total loss had become normal, and normal, in this case, felt like brokenness. He would sit in the wreckage of another finished chapter, watching other men grieve what he had already survived twice, and wonder what exactly had been hollowed out of him in the process. The nights were the worst. He would lie there cataloging the pieces that were gone again. Relationships, plans, identities, certainty, and feel almost nothing rise to meet the loss. No rage, no desperate bargaining, just the steady practiced rhythm of a man who had done this before. He told himself this was spiritual failure, emotional damage, proof that something in him could no longer attach properly. But the capacity to operate after catastrophic loss is not damage, it is training. God does not build this in men. He plans to leave in comfortable, stable positions. He builds it in the ones whose assignments guarantee loss. Not theoretical loss. Not manageable setbacks. Total loss. Position, reputation, relationships, the ground beneath their feet. Most men are trained to build and protect. These men are trained to keep functioning when building is no longer possible. The breaking was never trying to destroy their ability to feel. It was forging the only skill that will matter when everything the assignment demands requires them to move forward with nothing left to stand on. The men God breaks repeatedly do not become numb. They become capable of something most men will never need. The ability to function after total loss. Not in theory, but as lived reality. He understood it differently after that. The calm was not the death of hope. It was operational readiness. His life had never been meant for stability because the work waiting for him does not happen in stable environments. The repeated collapses were not removing his foundations to leave him empty. They were removing every foundation except the one that survives when foundations are taken. And for the first time, the silence after the second breaking did not feel like failure. It felt like preparation. He prayed the same prayer after the second collapse that he had prayed after the first. What did I do wrong? The words felt heavier this time, spoken from a man who believed he had already paid the price. He had done the work after the first break-in, surrendered, humbled himself, rebuilt slower and more carefully. He had become wiser, quieter, more grounded in faith. For a season he walked like a man who had finally understood. Then the second collapse tore through everything he had restored. And the old question returned like a debt he thought was settled. He sat with that question for months. The silence that answered it felt cruel. No gentle correction. No new revelation. Just the slow grind and realization that everything he had rebuilt after the first breaking was now being dismantled again. He watched pieces he had once called growth fall away. His new confidence, his carefully constructed identity, the version of himself he believed God had finally approved. It did not feel like refinement. It felt like regression. Like punishment for having misunderstood the assignment. Like proof that even his best efforts at surrender had been flawed. The despair that followed was deeper than the first collapse, because this time he thought he had already become the man he was supposed to be. Most men who survive the first breaking feel this exact disorientation when the second arrives. They interpret it as failure to progress. They tell themselves they built on the wrong foundation, learned the wrong lesson, or never truly surrendered. They look at the wreckage of their second chapter and assume the first one accomplished nothing. The mind spirals. I thought I was ready. I thought I had learned. The despair is quieter than rage, but heavier. It convinces a man he is further from readiness than he was at the beginning. But the second breaking was never evidence of regression. It was the removal of the layer beneath the first one. The first collapse took what was obviously unstable, The second took what appeared stable but was still resting on his own strength. His competence, his resilience, his rebuilt identity forged through suffering. These were not sins, they were not weaknesses, they were good things, strong things. Yet they were still not the foundation the assignment demanded. God does not keep breaking them because they are progressing exactly as designed, and the next layer must be removed before the real weight arrives. Removing every unstable thing at once would have destroyed the man entirely. So the curriculum unfolds in sequence layer by layer because only this pace allows survival. God does not break men twice because they failed the first lesson. He breaks them twice because the assignment requires a foundation deeper than one collapse could reach, and the second breaking removes what the first one could not. He understood it only later, in the same silence that once felt like abandonment. The question, "What did I do wrong?" had been the wrong question. He had not done anything wrong. The dismantling was not rejection of his progress, it was the continuation of it. The divine architect was not starting over, he was going deeper, removing the last remnants of self-built strength so that only what cannot be shaken would remain. The repeated breaking was never proof he was falling behind. It was evidence he was being taken further than most men are ever asked to go. And for the first time, the collapse no longer felt like the end of his readiness. It felt like the precise moment it truly began. He was still processing the wreckage when the first person came to him. Not for answers, not for strategy, just for presence. Someone drowning in their own collapse looked at him and saw a man who had already been where they were. And had kept breathing. He wanted to tell them the truth. He was not ready. He was still broken. Still raw. Still unsure if he would ever feel solid again. But the man did not need certainty. He only needed someone who had survived this exact kind of silence and continued moving. That moment lodged in him like a quiet accusation. He had assumed the assignment would come later, after the healing, after the strength returned, after the foundation felt trustworthy again. Instead, people kept showing up while he was still limping through the aftermath. He carried their weight in quiet conversations, in late-night messages, in the simple act of sitting with someone else's unraveling, while his own was not yet finished. The fear never left him. "I have nothing to give right now." Yet they kept coming, and each time something in him kept responding. Most men in this state believe the same thing. They interpret their current brokenness as proof that the real assignment is still ahead. They wait for the day when the pain has fully settled, when they feel wise instead of wounded, when they can stand up straight and say they are prepared. They watch themselves functioning in the ruins and assume God is holding back the true work until they are no longer a liability. The waiting becomes another form of despair, quieter than the collapse but heavier. But the assignment does not wait for readiness. It begins the moment the final breaking ends. Not because God is cruel, because the hardest assignments require a man who operates from a foundation he did not build and cannot lose. Most men are sent into battles they can fight from their own strength. These men, the ones broken repeatedly, are sent into assignments that will strip every illusion of control, the capacity to function after loss, to carry weight without certainty, to stand when nothing feels stable. That is not preparation for the war. That is the war. The men God breaks repeatedly are not waiting for their assignment to begin. They are already inside it, carrying weight they do not feel ready for, operating from a foundation they did not build and cannot lose. He understood it one ordinary afternoon, sitting across from another man whose life was coming apart. There were no grand words, no sudden surge of strength, just the steady recognition that he was not waiting anymore. The breaking had not been training for some future version of himself. It had been the curriculum that made this moment possible. God does not send his soldiers once they feel prepared. He sends them the moment they are finally standing on something other than their own strength. The assignment had already begun. And for the first time, the fact that he did not feel ready no longer frightened him. It confirmed he was exactly where he was supposed to be. He sat in the quiet aftermath and the old question returned, uninvited. How many times does a man have to be broken before God is finished? Not when he feels strong. Not when he feels ready. God is finished the moment the man is finally standing on a foundation he did not build, and that moment almost never feels like arrival. It feels like wreckage. Like the silence after everything familiar has been taken. The men who were broken most were never punished most. They were trusted most. Not with comfort, not with certainty, with assignments that demand everything. The breaking built to nothing. the breaking removed. He does not feel ready. He probably never will. But the people keep coming anyway, drawn to the steadiness only repeated loss can forge. And in the middle of what still feels unfinished, he understands. The foundation was never meant to feel stable. It was meant to hold weight his own strength never could. God does not finish breaking a man when the man feels ready. He finishes the moment the foundation is finally built on something the man cannot lose, even if the man does not recognize it as complete, until the weight arrives.